Our friend Alex Berenson, formerly of the New York Times, write about almost everything on COVID. Remember back when that mattered. Now it's just like everybody wants to pretend COVID never existed and there were never restrictions. And they never said, hey, go sit in circles in public parks. They never said, hey, put your mask on to walk to a restaurant. Then you can take your mask off as soon as you sit down. That none of this absurdity. Schools weren't shut down. All these things. I thought about it this morning because I'm still angry about it. When I took my kids, we had a doctor's appointment and you had to wear a mask to go to a kid's pediatric appointment for years in much of the country. But Alex, we want to talk with you now about the school shooting. And in Minneapolis, we have been talking about this quite a lot. And we're going to get into a variety of different angles that you think are significant. But let's start here. How much attention do you think there should be? You're a parent. Buck is now a parent. Obviously, I've got 3 kids. On the idea of minors being given drugs relating to their gender in the wake of the school shooting in Nashville and the school shooting in Minneapolis. Is it reasonable to say, hey, let's look at what we're giving these minor kids? Is it having an impact in their decision making?
Yes. I mean, I think if you frame it that way, the answer is 100% yes. And, that's not to say that, most trans kids or kids getting, or even young adults getting trans hormones are in any way violent or dangerous. But this has now happened a number of times. And I think it raises this bigger question, right? Like, these are very powerful drugs. Sex hormones are, they're very powerful. Even though they're naturally occurring, that doesn't mean they're not powerful. And when you frame it as, are they affecting kids' decision making? That's a perfectly reasonable question to ask.
Now, Alex, I know you are very vocal about your what you see as a connection between psychosis from marijuana / THC, right? The psychoactive drug that is what people are smoking the weed for. And in general, just the psychosis of it. But you also think that walk me through here what you believe, because I've seen you on Twitter talking about this, or rather writing about this. Do you think there's a link between the psychosis that has been a huge factor, obviously, in some of these horrific shootings and marijuana use? Talk us through that.
Sure. So start with this. Cannabis, and listen, I wrote a book, right, in 2019 called Tell Your Children that went into this connection in depth. And so although I'm not an MD or a PhD, I believe that I am qualified to talk about this in a serious way. And I've read, basically all the literature that I can find on it. And the evidence has really only gotten stronger since Tell Your Children came out, which was 6 years ago. There's been more studies done. So look, cannabis, / THC, because as you said, THC is the active ingredient in cannabis. It's the drug in cannabis that makes people high. Can cause and worsen psychotic episodes in people. There's no question about that. I think even the cannabis lobby would acknowledge that. And there is now, I would say, very good evidence that in some people, especially if you start using cannabis at a young age, and especially if you use a lot of it, and especially if you use high potency cannabis, and unfortunately all those 3 things are all connected, if you're doing that, you increase your risk of developing schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is essentially, a permanent psychotic condition, right? So people with schizophrenia will become psychotic. They'll maybe manage their psychosis with drugs, drugs called antipsychotics. They may get a little bit better, but then they're likely to become psychotic again. They'll relapse. Sort of the definition of schizophrenia is that it's a psychotic condition that's not drug related. It's not related to dementia. It's not related to anything else. And it just comes and goes. And it's a really terrible illness. Okay. About 1 in 150 people have this illness. And for the most part, they don't get married. They don't work. They don't have kids. They die about 20 years younger than other people on average, because you really can't function very well in society with schizophrenia. The other thing about schizophrenia and about psychosis is that people who have it are much more likely to become violent. There's no question about that. They're also more likely to be the victims of violence. So let's be clear about that too. But, when the classic line, the line that I use and Tell Your Children is, when you see somebody, if you're just an ordinary person you're on the subway platform in New York City, you see somebody talking to himself who clearly hasn't showered or, bathed, might be homeless at the other end of the platform or near you, you walk over to the other end of the platform because you intuitively know that psychosis is dangerous. Human beings know this. They know that people who are disconnected with reality can be dangerous to them. And that's particularly true when the psychosis has a paranoia flavor. So if I become mentally ill and I'm convinced that you're out to get me, I might lash out and hurt you. And that might be if you're a stranger. It might be if you're my child. It might be if you're, a police officer, right? So once I become convinced that you're a risk to me, I will lash out against you. And this is a real connection. I don't think anybody serious in the psychiatric community and medical community would doubt any of those things. So that I've just told you. So the question then becomes in encouraging people or allowing an industry to spring up that encourages the use of cannabis and THC, which is a known psychomimetic drug, are we essentially facilitating or encouraging is the wrong word, but is it likely that there was
let me cut you off here for a sec.
Sorry, that's a long
Let me cut you off for a sec, Alex, because I think this is important. I mentioned that we're all parents.
Yes.
I think a lot of people around our age, and we're all around the same age, actually bought into the idea that that THC, is in some way healthier to use and less damaging than alcohol. And if you look at the data right now, and I think this is important, alcohol use among young people is hitting record lows. They are not in any way using alcohol like past generations have. Also, nobody young by and large smokes, right? Like nicotine and the idea that you would smoke a pack a day, the use of cigarettes has collapsed among the young. But use of THC, use of weed-related products has surged. And the idea has been, Alex, that this is healthier and better for kids, better for young people, young adults. What you're telling us is that the evidence is actually that we're trading less dangerous objects for more dangerous ones based on some of the data that you're seeing.
So it's more complicated even than what you just said. And here's why. Alcohol use is down, okay? But it is not clear that people who use cannabis use less alcohol. Okay, people who use drugs tend to use drugs.
Okay.
So what you get is sort of an additive effect where people are using alcohol and cannabis. And by the way, nicotine.
So there's not as much of a substitution as my question implied based on what the data you see shows.
That's right. There are some people who are just using less drugs, right? Just the way they're kids, like people, I would say teens and young adults, they have sex less. Some of them don't drive, which just seems absolutely crazy to me. They seem perfectly content, a lot of them, to sit at home and essentially do nothing. And those are not and some of those people are using cannabis, but some are not. But there's definitely a group that is using cannabis and other drugs, even including psychedelics, in addition to alcohol. So what I would also say is it's not, people say to me, how can you say cannabis is less dangerous than alcohol? Nobody ever OD'd on cannabis, on THC, which isn't quite true. People can OD on it. Mostly they don't die on it. And here's the answer to that, the true answer to that. Cannabis is less physically dangerous than alcohol. No one could seriously disagree with that. If you drink too much alcohol, your liver can stop and you'll die. All right. That is not very likely. I mean, it's not going to happen if you use cannabis. But cannabis is more dangerous to your brain than alcohol. People don't get psychotic except in very, very rare times or in very late stage alcoholism from using alcohol. They do get psychotic, paranoid and psychotic all the time when they use cannabis. Okay, it's almost a feature of the drug. And so those people are more dangerous to the people around them in general than somebody who's using alcohol. And
so, Alex,
yes, sorry.
No, I want to ask you, finish your thought. I have something else. Go ahead.
So the question is, like, as a society, we're sort of trading a bar fight for like a mass stabbing or a mass shooting. Right? So, or maybe we're trading 10 bar fights or 100 bar fights for a mass shooting. But that is a real trade that we're making. This idea that somehow substituting cannabis for alcohol was going to be good for public health doesn't look like it's the case at all. And by the way, one last thing on this idea that when people are high and they drive, they don't speed, it's not true. this idea that people who use cannabis have a better mental health is 100% not true. In addition to this what I'm talking about with psychosis,
so Alex, I hate weed too, just to be clear. So I'm everything you're saying here, it jives with what I think. But I want to ask you something else that's related. But because when these things happen, you have a lot of people that will say, "Oh, and I'm seeing this on the right, particularly, which is why I want to talk about it." They go, "Oh, they start blaming SSRIs."
Yes,
and this, I think, there's a lot of misinformation, or a lot of people need to understand. Like, I just say this. I knew someone very well many years ago who was bipolar, and I knew this person, someone, it was a woman who I was dating, on meds, totally normal, doing great, very successful in life. Off meds, cannot function. Yep. And so I just think that, people, there's this thing of like, the SSRI zombies are running in and killing people. The right needs to understand that actually in the mental health world, there are people who their lives are saved by being on these drugs, actually. And a lot of veterans who deal with PTSD, whom I know have gotten tremendous benefit from SSRI. So can you speak to this a little bit? Because I think people just are like, everybody on SSRI should get off them. Like, that is a terrible idea.
It's a terrible idea. So I don't understand the hate for SSRIs. Okay. Look, I think SSRIs are overrated as drugs, and most people who have mild depression are going to recover from that depression on their own, whether or not they take an SSRI. But there are some people out there who have really severe depression who really can't function very well without an SSRI. And by the way, if you have psychosis, there are drugs called antipsychotics, and those are difficult drugs for people. They cause a lot of weight gain. They cause movement disorders in some people. But if you have psychosis, you need an antipsychotic. Like those drugs help people. And I think there's a really important distinction to make that gets lost between essentially recreational drugs of abuse, and SSRIs and antipsychotics. And so people will say, when I say this, like, people are like, he's a simp for pharma. And I say to them, like, do you know who I am? Pharma hates me.
Well, this is why I wanted you to talk about it, Alex, because when I try to point out reality people too, I'm like, no one's like sitting around just popping lots of Prozac because it's so fun.
That's exactly right. So the distinction isn't between a drug you prescribe and a drug that's not prescribed. The distinction is between drugs that get you high and drugs that don't get you high. So what gets you high? Stimulants get you high. So that's like an ADHD drug, Adderall. That's amphetamine. Those drugs get people high. Benzos, anti-anxiety drugs people take to get high. Nobody takes Prozac to get high. Nobody takes Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic, to get high. Those drugs have no street value because they don't get you high. And so
the people who need them really need them in many cases.
100% right. And so, again, like, are SSRIs potentially overprescribed? Yeah, sure. But I'll tell you something right now. Right now, most SSRIs are off patent. Okay, Prozac off patent, Lexapro off patent. Okay, that means that the companies don't make any money basically from them, and they're still being prescribed. Why? Because there's some people out there who need them, and you're totally right to make that point. And again, I'm not like I agree with you. I don't understand why the right has suddenly gotten fixated on SSRIs.
Yeah, they're demonizing SSRIs, and they're wrong. Honestly, a lot of the people that are doing this are just wrong, and they don't know what they're talking about. And I'll just say it out loud because I know it's true.
All right, let me ask you this, Alex, as we go to break, because I do think so many people listen, and their moms and dads, their grandma and grandpas. What would you want them to tell their kids who are 15 or 16 years old and have bought into this idea that you can use THC products as much as you want, and there's nothing to be concerned about with that? In 30 seconds, what would you want them to know?
In 30 seconds, and then I hope you give me one final segment. But in 30 seconds, what I'd say to you is, it's not just about THC, and it's not just about alcohol. There's no free lunch, okay? A drug that gets you high, that alters your relationship to the world, you're going to pay a price for it. And it may be a small price, and it may be a price that you're willing to pay to have that euphoria or that intoxication in the moment. But don't make the mistake of thinking cannabis and THC is medicine. Don't think that if you're popping your Adderall to stay up all night and you want to feel good, like that there's not a price to be paid. These drugs are addictive. They change your brain chemistry, and you will pay. And you may be able to tolerate that price, but it is coming. That's what I would say to them. That's what all parents should tell their kids.
We got to go to break to hit the read. We'll come back and get 1 minute from you to close out the hour.
Thanks so much.
If you'll stick with us. Yeah.
All right, we're back here with Alex Berenson, and Alex, we're just going to give you the floor for a second. You had more on this one. You're en fuego. Go ahead.
So listen. Here's what I want to say. The president of the United States right now has a very important decision that he's trying to make about whether or not cannabis should be rescheduled as a less dangerous drug under DEA rules. And so if he does that, okay, by the way, it's currently called Schedule 1, but that doesn't affect your ability in a legalized state to buy it. It doesn't mean anybody is arrested for possessing it or using it. All that stuff is under the current situation, okay? But the cannabis industry desperately wants them to reschedule because it will be a huge boost to their profits, okay? And that will mean more pot ads. It will mean more dispensaries. It will mean more kids and young people and young adults smoking a lot. This is what they want. And they don't want it because it's going to change public health or they don't want it because it's going to get, kids out of jail because it doesn't change any laws. It just will make their lives easier. And you, me, Laura Ingraham, we don't have money in this, okay? We are talking about this because we think it's important for the health of kids and young adults. And I know it's a tough choice, but the president should go with his gut. I know that he's concerned about substance abuse. I know, he's seen its effects on people, and he should keep cannabis as a Schedule 1 drug, and he should listen to people who don't have money.
Alex Berenson, everybody. Alex, thanks for being here.